Hi, my name's Rachel, and I'm here with John Burke. And this is Mindful, the podcast where we try to be a little more conscious about what we're filling our minds with and let a lot of that junk go for just a few minutes and just try to be mindful. Now, John here is a little bit different than a lot of our guests. I mean, he is a pastor, right?
Yeah.
But he's also an author and well, I'm going to say an expert in a certain area that most pastors aren't, which is near-death experiences.
True.
Yes, I know.
Yes.
And that's it's just a different angle than I talk to with a lot of pastors.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for this. I guess first thing I want to know is how did that become your area of expertise?
Accidentally. Truly, it was actually, I was an agnostic, and I thought Jesus was just a legend. I thought God, who knows? There's just no evidence. And my dad was dying of cancer, and this is a long time ago. And someone gave him the first research that coined the term near-death experience. And I saw it by his bedside table, picked it up and started reading it, and I couldn't put it down because I was like, dang, this is evidence. I mean, this could be evidence if this is real, right?
Right.
These are people who clinically die. They're actually, near death is a bad term because these people aren't near dead, they're dead. They have no heartbeat, no brain waves for minutes to hours, yet they're resuscitated. And they come back saying they were more alive than they've ever been, in a place more real than this has ever felt.
Right.
Many times in the presence of this God of light who is love beyond what our word can even describe, personal. They never want to leave. So I read this and I'm like, okay, I need to be more open probably to spirituality, and because so many of them were talking about this God of light and love, and others Jesus, I was like, okay, well, maybe I should read the Bible. So I did. And I started actually studying it, and that's how I came to faith.
And then everything else just kind of fell along from there. So
Yeah, well, I was an engineer, so I worked for years as an engineer and then left that and became a pastor.
so you have a very critical scientific mind as an engineer. That's your training
Yeah,
was analytical.
exactly. I want
So
to know why.
yeah,
How do you know?
yeah.
Yeah.
So that makes, I guess, perfect sense because I'm similar where I understand faith, but I also want to know, the why, the how,
Hmm.
the what, all of those answers. And I love that you defined what a near death experience is because we're not really talking about being near death. We're just talking about being, I guess maybe it should be temporarily dead,
Or
or
clinical death.
yeah.
Clinical death is a better term, actually.
Clinical death. Okay. I like that because that does sound
Yeah.
a little bit uh, more accurate to what we're talking about. So let me ask you too, is you've done a bunch of research on this. Can you tell me about kind of like what qualifies you to be an expert here? Like what was your research?
What qualifies
Yeah,
me?
no, like
My
yeah.
nutty mind that won't let go when I don't
Got one
understand
too.
something.
Hmm.
So I have literally for 40 years studied and interviewed 1,500 or so people who've had
Wow.
near-death experiences. And in 2015, and I mean, all the way back in 1989, I was hearing and studying and interviewing. And I was like, okay, they keep saying this, and this is in the Bible. And I literally made a chart. And in 1989, I did my first talk on the Bible and near death experiences at the University of California, Santa Barbara.
So you laid it
So I've been
out.
doing this for
Yeah.
a long time, but
Yeah.
I didn't write on it until 2015 when I wrote Imagine Heaven. And there I was showing how there are about 40 commonalities of what people who have near death experiences say. And this is all around the globe, all religious backgrounds, and yet consistent. And so I'm showing that not only does it show that there's something real here, it's not always what people expected, but I've also found that what the scriptures talk about to expect.
That's fascinating. I love that you made this kind of empirical chart of comparing the two because again, I have a weird mind too, so I kind of would like to see it. But what you mentioned the scriptures I think is really interesting because you talk about Paul in the Bible maybe having a near-death experience,
Yeah.
or there's some evidence. Can you speak into that? Because that was fascinating to
Yeah,
me.
well, in Acts chapter 14, it talks about how Paul, well, first of all, Paul was Saul.
Yes,
So he
yes.
was a Pharisee. He was one of the ones who had Jesus crucified. So he
Yes.
did not believe Jesus was Messiah, Son of God. He was the
Right.
opposite. And it says in Acts chapter 9, he's on his mission to actually arrest Christians. He was having them arrested and even killed. And this brilliant light shines on him, this God of light, and he falls to the ground and says, "Who are you, Lord?" And the light says to him, okay, so
Mhm.
pause. This is exactly near-death experiences around the world. This God of light, brilliant, who is love. They know it. They know this is God. But this light says to him, "I am Jesus who you're persecuting." Okay, so then Paul actually becomes a follower of Jesus, and he's traveling the world telling people. In Acts 14, it says that he was in Lystra, and a mob turns on him and they stone him to death and drag him out of the city and leave him for dead. And then his friends are rallied around him and he miraculously revives. He gets up and he
Yeah.
goes back into the city, which I would not do if they just stoned me to death.
Yes.
But he says in 2 Corinthians 12, Paul writes about himself and he says, 14 years ago, whether I was in my body or out of my body, I don't know, only God knows, but I was taken up to heaven. I was taken up to paradise and I heard and saw things inexpressible. Now, was that 14 years ago in Lystra? I think it could be, because he doesn't give reference to any other time why and how was he taken up to heaven. But
Yeah.
that's exactly what near-death experiencers talk about.
So that is one of the common threads is the light. There's some other things, right? Like seeing loved ones, or what other things have you seen just like consistently happen?
Consistently, people say they leave their body, but they still have a body. It's a spiritual body, but they're still themselves, not just with 5 senses, more like 50 senses. They often can observe what's happening in the room of their resuscitation, which is
Mm,
what convinced me as a skeptical engineer, because their observations can be verified.
right.
And if it's in your brain, they shouldn't have been able to see and observe these things.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that was one thing. Then they travel, oftentimes through a portal will open up or a tunnel. They'll travel to this place of exquisite beauty, not unlike Earth, mountains and flowers and trees and forests, and a welcoming committee of people who've died before them. Their family and friends and relatives will come and greet them many times. The light that comes out of everything in heaven is love and life. They consistently say this, even blind people. So, people blind from birth who have a near death experience, in their near death experience, they can see, even though when they come back, they're blind again. And they describe the light that they saw in heaven as coming out of everything, and it was palpable, like you could feel it, and the feeling was love. Now, what's fascinating is that correlates to what John says in the book of Revelation. He was given a vision of heaven, and he says, "The city of God has no need of sun or moon, for the glory of God is its light, and the Lamb is its lamp, and the nations will walk in that light." It's exactly what it says, in that light. How and where would blind people ever get the idea that the light of heaven is love that comes out of everything?
Right. They wouldn't have the context for that.
They would never have
Yeah.
heard it on
Yeah.
earth, and they've
Yeah.
never seen it, and the
Yeah.
sun just feels hot.
Right, right. That makes perfect. And it's funny you're talking about it looking a lot like Earth. It reminds me too of C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia: The Last Battle, when
Mm-hmm.
he describes Aslan's country. It's much like ours, and there's people there greeting them, and it's yeah, it's almost a continuation. And read C.S. Lewis if you haven't.
It's a
You do.
continuation, but in new dimensions of time and new dimensions of space.
Right.
And that changes everything. Everything is so much more real and vivid, and I mean it's as more real as if we're living this experience on a flat black and white painting in 2 dimensions,
Mm-hmm.
and then suddenly we die and our flat self is peeled off and brought out into this three-dimensional world.
Yeah.
You're still yourself, but you're more. And
I
that's
love
what it's
that.
going to be like.
I love the excitement with which you speak about it. It's almost like you've had a near-death experience. It's like you've really like brought this
I
love
haven't.
into
I've not
yourself.
had
Like
any
no, yeah, yeah,
mystical anything.
not, but it's rubbed off on
Well,
you. I can
because
tell.
it's hope for everyone, you know?
Yes.
I mean, the second book I wrote, Imagine the God of Heaven, I interviewed 70 people on every continent, every religious background, and they're describing the same God.
Oh,
And consistently the same attributes, the same characteristics, and they never want to leave his presence because they say, this is the relationship I've always wanted. This is the best friend I've always had. And they
mhm.
just didn't realize it.
And that's something that I think that you touched on earlier when you were on stage was that people have a lot of misconceptions about heaven. I know growing up, I thought it was, a church service we sat through. And that's what my mom told me, not a church service, but that we praised God for the rest of
Be
eternity. And
worshiped forever,
yeah, and
which
it
sounds
just,
horrible to
it,
me,
especially
even as
to
a
a little
pastor.
kid,
Oh,
you're like, so what, you don't think, based on what you've studied and based on what the Bible says, that that's the case. Like
no.
how would you describe what the heaven that God has waiting for
Well,
us to
think
be?
about what Jesus said. So he said on his last night on earth, he's eating the Last Supper, he's drinking wine, and he says, I won't drink this cup from the vine with you again until we drink it anew in my Father's kingdom at
Mm,
his feast. And Jesus said, God is not the God of the dead, he's the God of the living.
yes.
So it's life. And this is consistently what near death experiencers are saying. They felt alive and then more alive. They didn't feel like they died.
Yeah.
They come more alive. And where they go and the experience of heaven is life. I mean, Dr. Mary Neal, the spine surgeon, and Captain Dale Black, commercial airline pilot, that I was talking about. They're there before this city
Mm,
and they're looking into the city and they said it is full of life. Like people were excitedly going about, they were working on stuff, they were doing stuff, but it's the way I like to describe it is if you've ever been in the zone, like you've been on some project where you're
mm,
just like time is your enemy because you're just lost and you're like, oh, where'd the time go?
right.
It's like that.
I'm ADHD. I'm always in the zone. I'm always hyper focused. No, that I love that because I find that really comforting. And it definitely rings true to what I believe, being
Mhm.
close to God will be like when we're in heaven. And I just find so much hope in that. And I really thank you for spending the time to talk to us about it. One of my favorite things to say is you can get wherever books are sold, John Burke's book. I love saying that. Wherever books are sold. You have several books, but the two that relate to this are
Imagine heaven.
Imagine Heaven and
Imagine the God of heaven.
Imagine the God of Heaven. So if you are interested, do you have a website where you sell the books to, or is it?
Well, I have a website, imagineheaven.net. I have a podcast,
Oh
the
yeah,
Imagine Heaven podcast with John Burke. It's on YouTube and anywhere you can get your podcast.
that's where this one's going too. Well, why don't we just link that in the description box down below? We'll put all that info there. Again,
Yeah,
thank
and you can
you.
hear these people's stories yourself as I interview them and then kind of weave it together.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay, we're gonna have to start bringing them on. Well, thank you for joining us. If you're in the Dallas area, we would love to have you here as a guest. Otherwise, until next week, stay mindful. Thank you for joining us.